Good morning. I would like to welcome Professor K.K. Mishra for a small audiovisual documentation, and it's a pleasure to invite Professor K.K. Mishra, who's been my teacher in Hyderabad Central University. Professor K.K. Mishra is currently an ICSSR Senior Fellow and was formerly the Vice Chancellor of Utkal University of Culture, Bhubaneswar. He was Professor of Anthropology and Dean, School of Social Sciences at the Central University of Hyderabad. He was educated at Utkal University, Bhubaneswar, Jawaharlal Nehru University, New Delhi, and University of Kent at Canterbury, UK. He was recipient of the prestigious Fulbright Scholar in Residence Award in the USA and the Commonwealth Academic Staff Fellowship in the UK. He was also invited at the University of Bergen, Norway, as a guest researcher. He was honored with Sarath Chandra Roy Memorial Medal by the Asiatic Society, Kolkata, for his contribution to anthropology in Asia. Professor Mishra was the director of National Museum of Mankind, Bhopal, and the director of the Anthropological Survey of India. He taught at Utkal University, University of Hyderabad, and the Austin College, Texas, USA. It's a pleasure to invite Professor K.K. Mishra here. Thank you so much, sir, for coming.
You're welcome.
And we today would be discussing on traditional knowledge and development. And I would like to start by asking a question. What is indigenous knowledge?
Yes.
You can
Yes.
tell more about it.
Yes. Actually, indigenous knowledge is a very confused kind of concept because it has got many synonyms. Just now you said traditional knowledge and then switched over to indigenous knowledge, and many people, including myself, we also do the same thing. These are used interchangeably.
Right.
Many concepts like traditional knowledge, ethnoscience, folk knowledge, all these are used. Indigenous technical knowledge, indigenous environmental knowledge, these are all used interchangeably to denote one thing, that is traditional knowledge.
Right.
In India, for example, we don't use the word indigenous, very much, in the sense that Indian history is different from the history of other nations like United States and Australia, where there is an indigenous group or indigenous groups, and there are outsiders, the colonizers. In Indian context, everybody is indigenous, so therefore pointing out or isolating one single group or a dozen group as indigenous is problematic. So therefore we don't use indigenous, and it is safer to use traditional knowledge. Even tradition also is questioned many times, but then I prefer to use traditional knowledge or local knowledge. Better to call it local knowledge. Now, when many people use the word indigenous, we should use in this discussion indigenous as the concept, accepted, approved concept. What is indigenous knowledge? This was the first question. Indigenous knowledge is a collective knowledge, and collective in the sense a knowledge which is shared by the community, not really by isolated groups within the community. So everybody shares this knowledge, and this knowledge is related more specifically within nature. As we all know, indigenous groups are very closer to nature, and therefore their knowledge about the nature, about the environment, about the ecology is normally understood as indigenous knowledge. It has got a few characteristics. For example, indigenous knowledge is oral rather than codified. It is transmitted from generation to generation orally, and that is the best way of transmitting this knowledge, indigenous knowledge. Older people talk to the younger people, and younger people as apprentices get the knowledge and make use of them. So indigenous knowledge is normally a kind of knowledge which is transmitted orally, unlike the global science or scientific knowledge or the lab-based knowledge, and it is more related to the nature and with the livelihood of the people, as to how they get their livelihood with the help of their knowledge. So this is what we largely understand as indigenous knowledge or traditional knowledge.
Right. Thank you, sir. And in fact, what you said, the word indigenous itself is contested. And if we say indigenous people, again, there are so many questions, because do we call them tribal people, or even the word tribe itself, though it's a government terminology, but then how do we look at the proper terminology for indigenous?
Indigenous in Indian context, particularly indigenous context, we can use in global context. As I said, the history of the United States is different. Let me go back a little bit into American history. Let us see. There were American Indians, and popularly we call them as Red Indians. Several groups of American Indians, and then the Europeans came and colonized them.
Yes.
So therefore there are distinct indigenous groups and white Europeans. Their colors are different, their cultures are different. So in many aspects they are different. The other example is Australia.
Yes.
In Australia we had Australian Aborigines, we call them Australian Aborigines, the indigenous groups. And similarly the colonizers came, those who came from the West, from Europe, they were white people, and therefore you can see from their color, from their culture, that these are two different groups.
In India, Canada also.
Canada also, yes. In Indian context, we don't find any color distinction, we don't find any cultural distinction. It is a kind of continuity, because India has a different kind of history. Very interestingly, those who came to India, in case there were several groups, those who came to India, those who came to India, they became Indians. That is the melting pot character of India, and therefore we don't use or prefer to use indigenous in Indian context. Tribe is also, as you rightly said, it is a very contentious term. We should avoid tribe, particularly in social sciences and anthropological circles. We have already started, avoiding the concept of tribe. Instead of that, we say scheduled tribe, which is a constitutional category. It is an administrative category, and if we look at the cultural side of it, then we find there are several groups, those who are culturally distinct. You asked the question as to who are the indigenous people. In Indian context, I would say that the groups, those who are closer to the nature in India, they have their distinct language, they have their distinct territory, and all spread over a small area, comparatively a small region or small area. We call them as tribes or indigenous people, but then it is better to use tribes or indigenous people. They are the scheduled tribes, and the integrating factor is their attachment to the land, their attachment to the nature, particularly the forest, because most of them are forest dependent. So their attachment to the nature. Other is language. Most of them speak same or the similar kind of language if they belong to the same group. So they are culturally distinct, they are linguistically distinct, and also they are territorially distinct. So this we say as indigenous people of this country.
Right. Going on from there, we talked about indigenous knowledge.
Yes.
And why and how the indigenous knowledge is eroding.
Yes.
And what should be done? Maybe
Yes.
that can be taken as
to a very large extent, indigenous knowledge is getting eroded. You are very right. And there are several reasons for that. The major reason is commercialization. In the present context, we find what we call the globalization. And the other kinds of izations, like modernization, westernization, commercialization, all these izations are having a heavy toll on indigenous knowledge. That is the major reason. But then there are other reasons as well why we are losing indigenous knowledge. For example, I could say that modern education is one of the reasons why indigenous knowledge is lost. If you look at the curricula, school curricula, used even in the areas where indigenous people are living, there is no mention of this knowledge. So it is not transmitted as a part of their curricula, as a part of their teaching. The modern education teaches us about the rest of the world except the local area. What is happening in the local area, what knowledges exist in the local area. These are never dealt with, these are never taught to the local children, and therefore this is lost. Then oral tradition is completely gone. Oral tradition is based on some kind of structure, social structure.
Exactly.
For example, displaced, they lose their environment. And environment is the base of indigenous knowledge. And once the nature is lost, they come to a different environment or different kind of ecosystem. Obviously, the knowledge is lost, or indigenous knowledge is lost. Then the unwillingness of some of the people to share this knowledge, even among the indigenous people. I could give the example of traditional medicine or the healing practices, and there are specialists, herbalists. They don't want to share their shamanic knowledge. If the knowledge is not shared, obviously it is going to be lost. So these are some of the reasons. There are so many, but these are some of the reasons why indigenous knowledge is getting lost these days.
So I would like to add on this, because when I researched in the Northeast region and other places, looking at traditional medicine and what the tribal healing is happening, supported by IGNC, they have a fear that their knowledge is being taken away and they are not getting any benefit back. And the whole issue of IPR comes in here, and that's why they are not sharing. But interestingly, there's so much knowledge, but they're old people and they're actually leaving the earth, and the younger generations are not really picking up because there's no incentive for them.
Right.
There's a lot of scope to improve, and I think through Department of Ayush maybe a few more things can be done.
Yes.
You've connected this indigenous knowledge to nature conservation.
Yes.
How do we see this connection between indigenous knowledge and nature conservation?
Yes, there is a strong connection between indigenous knowledge and nature conservation, because fortunately or unfortunately, wherever indigenous people live, there are ample of resources, natural resources. There is forest, there is water, biodiversity. All kinds of resources are with the tribal people or with the indigenous people. And this has been, this is a historical kind of thing. So they are the custodians of the nature, or the custodians of the environment in which they live. So it is a strong bond. Now the question is that there are certain things, what we call the values among these indigenous people, that help the people to conserve their nature. What are these values? These are mostly in the form of morality. There are certain moral prescriptions. And what is this moral prescription? The moral, I could give one example of their religion. It is we call them animists or animism as the kind of religion we brand. Animism is the kind of religion of most of the indigenous people. After all, what is this animism? The animism is the belief in the spirit of all possible kind of things, or what in Indian philosophy we say, or Hindu philosophy we say, Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. The entire world is like a family. So tribals always believe in animism, indicating that there are spirits in every object, living or non-living, and therefore there is a unity. This is a kind of moral value. Similarly, also we find that reciprocity. See, there are different kinds of reciprocal relations we find between humans and humans, between humans and environment or nature, and this reciprocity is one of the moral philosophies of indigenous people. That reciprocity helps in maintaining the conservation or maintaining the nature, or it helps in biodiversity conservation. The other thing is solidarity. The solidarity is, there was long back, one of our senior colleagues, Professor L.P. Vidyarthi, one of our teachers, he had developed a concept called man-nature-spirit complex. It is a complex, man, nature and spirit, or the ancestors. So this kind of complex makes these people together, or there is a bond, solidarity that develops between man on the one hand, nature on the other hand, and ancestors or spirits on the, as a kind of third factor. So therefore this solidarity actually helps in the conservation of the biodiversity. Probably I can give a very small example of the totemic beliefs. Each indigenous community, even among us also, what we call Gotra, are the clans of the indigenous people. Each clan has got a totem. Totem is mostly in the form of animals or plants, and and this means that they believe that their origin was from that particular plant or animal, and therefore they don't harm those plants and animals. This is one of the examples. The other example is the sacred groves. Even now also there are thousands of sacred groves all over this country, and sacred groves are the places where they believe that their ancestral spirits live there, their gods and goddesses live there, and therefore not a single object or a single plant or animal of that area should be harmed. So in a way it is a kind of nature conservation. There have been several studies and people have found out hundreds of endangered species from the sacred groves. So therefore indigenous knowledge in a way helps in the conservation of nature or biodiversity conservation.
I would like to give a small example of morality which you talked about the tribes. Way back when we were doing master's fieldwork, and we went to a tribe, there was a full mango tree and all mangoes were ripe.
Yes.
They didn't pick it up.
Yes.
So when we asked the children there, they said, no, we haven't celebrated the festival of mango. Once that is celebrated, we'll take out all the mangoes and distribute to the whole clan.
Correct.
So that is how the tribes live.
Yes.
And you rightly talked about the spirits also. In Sikkim, when I was doing my fieldwork, one of the researchers said that when they pass through the forest, they go very silent. They don't make noise, and they said there are spirits around, there are trees, and they have their life, so we should not be disturbing them. So it's so much of ecocentric way of living, unlike many of us who feel that only humans are the most dominant and we try to splurge everything.
The same observation I had with the Kondareddis. When the Kondareddis set out in the forest, they say that we have to be absolutely silent. And because I asked, why are you silent? Why do you go silently? They say because there are spirits around. We don't want to disturb them. So
exactly. So they are very much connected to nature, and that's how I feel that's the reason they're being more happy than a modern person.
Absolutely.
So another question, sir, why is indigenous knowledge essential for sustainable development? We are talking of sustainable development.
Yes, we are talking about the sustainable development and sustainable development goals. As all of us know, there are 17 sustainable development goals, and that was ratified by 193 member countries in 2015. We have a goal by 2030. We have to eradicate hunger, poverty, we have to ensure equality, and so on and so forth. Anyway, we'll come to the main question of indigenous knowledge and development. By and large, I'll talk about development. It is through examples. This knowledge, which is more related to nature or more closer to nature, always helps in development process of the concerned communities or humanity in general also. I'll give by way of one or two examples. How does it help, for example, in eradication of hunger? As a young researcher, when I was doing field work among the Saura are the highlanders in the bordering areas of Odisha and Andhra Pradesh. And Sauras are normally shifting cultivators. Sauras used to cultivate or produce as many as 35 crops from their Kodu plots. 35. The plot size should be hardly 1 to 1.5 hectares, not more than that. Individual plots. 35 different.
And self-sustained.
Yes.
You don't have to buy anything.
Nothing to buy. Because there you get cereals, you get pulses, you get oil seeds, you get vegetables, everything from medicinal plants, fruit trees, and so on and so forth. 35 plants. Then I used to ask them, because this was not liked by the agricultural scientists. They were going for monocropping. And that is the reason why, if you see that while we were going to regenerate forest, there was a policy by the government to plant one particular variety. They destroyed the original forest, and then they planted, let us say, either sal or some other varieties, the timber varieties, and so on and so forth, monocropping. Then I asked the tribal people, indigenous people, that why are you cultivating so many crops? They said this is a kind of insurance. Cultivating on a hill or hillock or a hill slope is always, it is challenging in the This they say as a kind of crop insurance for them, and poverty, hunger, all these things could be eradicated if we use their indigenous knowledge. I have seen in Assam, for example, bamboo plantation. Assam is full of many rivers and canals, water bodies, water streams, and so on and so forth. And normally these, they cross the banks and enter into the settlements. In order to prevent that, you find them the bamboo plantations, particularly in Goalpada district of Assam, if you are familiar. So bamboo plantation prevents water spillage from the canals into the settlements. This is a wonderful example of indigenous knowledge and management of floods in the flood-prone areas of this country. Similarly, house system in Jammu and Kashmir, I have seen there is a tuck system of housing. What they do is that is a seismic zone, highly vulnerable for earthquake and all. So therefore, the kind of construction they make with wooden pillars in between, that makes the house much more stable. Even the RCC roofs fall when there is an earthquake, but not this traditional housing system. So there are so many indigenous knowledge which helps the people in their development. We are making a kind of uniform policy to give everybody a similar kind of house, let us say, under different housing schemes and all, which are not really suitable. These kinds of things are environmentally selective. Nature has made them or made the area in such a way that there are special kind of requirements, and local people have their knowledge as to how to live in that kind of environment. So indigenous knowledge is very helpful in different kinds of developments. We could give a number of examples, but then these are some of the small examples that I could give, which are helpful in development of the local people in a local environment.
In fact, very well said, because when I research on disasters also, I could see that how people have their own understanding of the environment, the resources which they use for their houses, which are very much in tune with the nature and the hazards which they face. But like you said, post-tsunami, the kind of houses which came in are mostly the concrete houses, which needs a lot of money to maintain. And because of heavy rains over there, it's very difficult. And unlike the Nicobaris, they had such beautiful huts closer to the water, but still on the stills. They used to move in strong winds, but they will not fall. So such traditional wisdom which they have, and we are actually destroying. And the other point which you talked about, the cash crops. In fact, when you look at cash crops can fail and they can go bankrupt. And the ecofeminism, when you talk of women asking for crops which are more productive and which are more sustainable compared to men who want cash crop, and then that can lead to very good amount of money, or it can on the other way completely destroy.
Let me add one thing here. I have seen among the Banda women. Banda is a group, those who live in the highlands of Odisha and the Malkangiri district. Banda women, originally they were millet cultivators, and Banda women were encouraged to go for paddy because of the intervention of the government. Because of the climatic conditions, climate change, sometimes there used to be excess rain, and therefore paddy crop was lost. Banda women asked the government officials to tell them the alternates. On the other hand, the officials asked them that what do you prefer to cultivate. They said, we have been cultivating millet and we will cultivate millet. So they were given good varieties of good seeds of millet, and now the kind of feedback that we are getting is that Banda women are very happy because of the millet cultivation, which is resistant to these climate changes. So they are getting some harvest at the end of the year. That is a wonderful experience. The other thing is about Andaman. Even when you said after the tsunami, I went to the Javas. Then I asked them that what was the casualty after the tsunami, and they said, the old man said, not a single life was lost. I said, how come? They said that we knew it. I said, how do you know that there would be a devastation like this? They said, one day before, I don't know, somebody was narrating, he himself was narrating, an old person, that the sea receded in the evening. And our forefathers used to say that if the sea recedes, then there is an indication that it will come back with much vigor. Yes.
definitely indicate some kind of danger.
Animals, birds also.
Yes.
The movement of the birds.
Right,
Yes.
right.
Yes.
So one last question, sir.
Yes.
How can we apply indigenous knowledge for development?
Yes, that is what I said.
More examples if you can.
Yes, yes. We could apply indigenous knowledge for various kinds of development. For example, in our forest management, we can use indigenous knowledge for development because local people know what vegetation grows well in a particular kind of forest. It's not that whatever we decide nationally, we will go for one kind of uniform kind of forest. So the forest regeneration we can do. We can do water management with the help of indigenous knowledge of the people because they know the terrain, where water. For example, I have seen among the Saura, and they go for, some of them go for what we call the step kind of cultivation, terrace cultivation. In the terrace cultivation, the water management is so scientific. No engineer probably can challenge that kind of water management. Water from the hill streams.
Right.
They are, they come to all the fields in the terrace in such a way that no water is lost.
Right.
There is no wastage of water, but then there is absolute proper optimum utilization of the water in the terrace fields. So this water management we can learn from the indigenous people, from their traditional knowledge. Forest also, as I said, we can do that. Similarly, the other kinds of disaster management always, because they know the climate, they know the vegetation, they know the behavior of the birds, animals. The other important thing is ecotourism. Right. In many places, like in Boros, Boros in Assam, in the Manas wildlife sanctuary.
Right.
It is mostly the Boros, those who are managing, because they know single-horned rhinos, their behavior, their breeding habits, and so on and so forth. So it becomes easier for them to guide the tourists and showing them around. And ecotourism could be with the help of traditional knowledge, where people can get a share of the profit that the industry gets out of tourism. So there are so many other areas in which indigenous knowledge could be fruitfully, productively used.
One good thing which is happening now post-COVID is how even tourism department is promoting homestays and ecotourism across the country. We have such beautiful homestays now, and people go there for, say, both vacation and also work. So I think staycation is the word which they use, where you can stay there and work. So that is a very good development, and I think that's how one can have more sustainable tourism at the same time not destroying the environment. And as you rightly point out, we can't have one kind of development program or planning, because India is such a diverse country.
Exactly.
So much of cultures, cultural differences.
Yes.
I think we need to really tweak it to the local environment and that cultural knowledge.
Yes.
And then only we can think of sustainable development.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Thank you so much, sir. It was a pleasure talking to you and interacting with you on such an important topic.
Thank you for giving this opportunity. It's a privilege.
Thank you. Thank you so much, sir.